It's part of a series called The Timekeepers, and it features a bunch of different mantle clocks that the main subject is different prehistoric animals. So the subject of all of my work is prehistoric animals, and I do a lot of paleo art, scientific reconstruction of these animals as part of my work. And really the goal is to get people more interested in natural history by drawing them in with these really strange, curious animals that a lot of people aren't familiar with. So these are the more unknown prehistoric mammals that once existed. So the piece that is there is a bear dog, a sort of bear dog combination animal that existed millions of years ago. For me, putting the prehistoric animals in that 18th century context and in the context of those decorative objects is inspired by actual French 18th century decorative objects. So the Louis XIV had mantle clocks that featured all these exotic animals, usually elephants or rhinos, things that people in Europe hadn't really seen a lot of. And those were like real special gifts for people high in the court. And so I'm also interested in sort of cultural phenomena surrounding exotic animals and things that we have done in history to sort of elevate them to this sort of important status as objects in the home. And so that sort of lent itself to replacing those exotic animals with these prehistoric ones. And so I love combining the prehistoric animals with a context that is human history, because I think the contrast is really interesting and it makes us think about our place in nature differently. And also the 18th century was sort of the time period just before we discovered these fossils. And so right before we got our minds blown by all of these extinct creatures and had to start rethinking where we fit in nature, we really thought we were the center of the universe in that French 18th century sort of palace aesthetic. And so that's why I like combining those two. They're just so opposite ends of the spectrum. Not everybody notices this right away. They look at it and they just see a clock and they assume it's ticking forwards. But if you look at it closely, the second hand is actually moving the wrong direction. It's ticking backwards. And so that was the hardest thing to figure out how to do on these pieces. The clock's ticking backwards was really important as far as the animals coming from the past and me wanting these pieces to sort of act like a time machine, both art history wise and natural history wise. And so they do tick backwards. It's very subtle because it's just the second hand. And so a lot of people don't notice, but when people do notice, the reaction is really fun and sort of mind blowing, and they're all confused and they can't figure out why it's ticking backwards. And that's really what I wanted these pieces to do, is make people question their understanding of time, because that's what discovering the prehistoric animals first did for us, is that we had to start thinking about the earth in terms of millions of years. And that's something, the idea of deep time, that we can't really understand, something humans have a hard time wrapping their brains around. We really haven't been around that long as a species. So millions and billions of years is sort of abstract.